This is Al. I'll make another video for Bluefire Poker. Today I'm going to continue on with my Bluefire Poker member Eric's review. This is video number 2. If you want more details about his game, you can go to back to the beginning of the last video if you didn't see that. Very briefly, I think this guy has a pretty strong game. There's a lot of things I like about it. I'm concerned about his opening frequencies, particularly on in the button and small blind first open. I think they're way too tight. Cutoff EP and MP, they were also tight, but I'm less concerned with those. In the last video, I felt like he was missing a lot of isolation raises. There's a lot of money you can pick up there, isolating fairly wide. I think his isolation sizing was a little bit on the small side. And then post flop, we had a big issue, and we really didn't see anything in the last video that would give us any more insight, but there was a clear issue with extracting value, flopping top pair, top kicker, and he was making on average 2 big blinds less per hand than the comparison group, which ends up being a massive amount of money over the database size. Now, looking at his post flop play, a lot of it looked, either somewhere between acceptable and decently strong. The one area where he was clearly off in, well, there's actually 2 areas he's clearly off in. First off, after he calls a 3-bet and he's on the flop, he had major win rate issues there, but even over an 85,000 hand sample size, the sample size of that situation is so small that it's really impossible to know if that number is completely variance or partially variance or not variance at all. But if we see in those spots like that through this video, we'll definitely talk more about that. And then also there was a issue with both on the turn and the river when the previous street was checked around. His betting frequencies were a bit low in spots like that, but his overall win rate when he was in that spot and he had the choice between checking and betting was very, very low. And so we'll be looking for either well, actually, it wouldn't be bad calls. I'll talk about that in a second. We're going to be looking for betting mistakes, which I would think would be most likely missed bets, but also could be value bets that shouldn't happen. But I doubt it's the latter. I think it's probably the former. Now, as far as him facing a bet, one of the really strong parts of this player's game is facing turn bet and facing river bet. Really, really strong parts of his game. And so, yeah, it's probably not him taking call lines. The issue is not him calling in spots like that. It's going to be an issue with his betting game or missed bets, as we'll have to see if we can find out here. All right, so let's get the replayer going so we can get through as much of his play as possible. All right, tables are 1 top left, 2 top right, 3 bottom left, 4 bottom right. Table 1, the 5-6 suited, 2 short stacks. I don't think you can do anything there. You just got to fold. Bottom right, we've got King Queen in the small blind. Now, the opener is he's a short stack. So what I'm about to say doesn't really apply to this situation, but we don't get to see that many hands in these replays, so I do want to address something that I think is pretty important here, and that's extending value ranges versus non-folders. Now, recreational players are typically your biggest non-folders. In this particular spot, fold versus 3-bet. Typical recreational players will have a fold versus 3-bet of, 20, 30, maybe 40%. You rarely see them folding more than 40% of the time. And as a general rule, if a player is not folding at a frequency that allows you to bluff, you have to extend your value ranges, and how much you extend your value ranges is dependent on how little they're folding. But I see too many players making what I think is a fairly massive mistake of just going value only in spots like this. 10s plus ace king. But if this player doesn't want to fold, hands like king queen, ace queen, even ace jack off, ace jack suited, ace 10 suited, even king jack suited, all those hands will put a low folder into a ton of dominated situations. Now, I should say also though that a lot of recreational players you also have to factor in their pre-flop opening frequency. And so if you've got the typical passive recreational play and they're playing say like a 50 VPIP but an 8 pre-flop raise, yeah, don't overestimate how much they're calling you there, because they're just not opening up that many hands, and so they're not going to fold very much versus 3-bets. And so, hands like the King Jack suited Ace-10 off are probably not going to be in play there. But the other hands I'm probably still okay with. Depends on how little they're folding, what position they're in, and so forth. But anyway, I just want to, because this spot resembles that type of thinking, if this guy was deeper stacked, I want to make sure that you guys are doing that, because one of the ways that smaller stakes games will differ than higher stakes games is lower folding frequencies, especially versus 3-bets, quite often versus C-bets, and I'm not talking just versus recreational players. There's a number of rec players that just call too much in spots like that, and you always just gotta you have to make sure you're adjusting your ranges to what they're doing, and that's certainly a spot where an adjustment is very necessary. Now here, with this guy being a short stack, as many hands as he's opening, I mean, he's not opening up that many hands, 25, but he's clearly a recreational player. I mean, I feel like this guy's going to call it off here light enough that I think the King-Queen is fine. I also like this because the player to our right seems to also be a recreational player. And yeah, we want a 3-bet here, and we don't really have a problem seeing a bunch of flops. Yeah, table 3, the player to the left min opened, and we went ahead and called with King 10 against a min open, not a full stack. But I think that's fine, and that's another mistake I think players do make with some frequency is not adjusting big blind and even small blind cold calling frequencies versus smaller opens. With more and more players opening up smaller, that has to mean that with the higher implied odds that you're getting, the better pot odds you're getting with the initial call, additional hands have got to come into play. And I think this hand's just fine. Although this player's not opening up that many hands, your odds are good enough that this is okay. Yeah, I wouldn't try to make a move there either. Now over here on the right, let's back up here for just a second. Because he goes ahead and just bets for this player's last 331. Honestly, what I would do here is I would check call. It's not a big deal here, but I don't think you get to get this. He's only folding out worse hands. And so if you check, you're trying to balance out between giving away a little bit of equity. Let's say the guy's got 9-10. So you're giving away 6 outs of equity, and 2 of those 6 outs actually give you your backdoor flush draw. So you're going to give away a little bit of equity versus trying to induce this guy to try to rep the ace with a hand that's worse than yours. And since I think it's absolutely impossible to get him to fold anything that's better than our hand, it's better to go for a check call here. Now, if we had 10-jack here, and we might be able to fold out a king or queen, yeah, go ahead and bet here. I mean, I'm not sure if... I think we probably could there do enough to make it an okay bet. But, yeah, I just go for check call here. No way would I go for a check fold. Yeah, he does fold, but, obviously he's not folding anything better than us. let's see, table 3. We've got a little something here against another reg, but looking at their pre-flop raise of only 11%, I know it's a small sample size, but we've got to go with the data we have. Yeah, I would not look to mess around with this at all. One thing I do play quite a bit more hands in the small blind versus these button min opens. My first, my preferred line is to 3-bet, but I need to see some information about their fold versus 3-bet before I can determine if I can bluff them. But I do tend to call here quite widely. I feel like all my suited broadways that I don't want to 3-bet are fine. And we're talking about full stack versus the min open. Suited aces, mid-suited connectors, most your offsuit broadways I think are mostly fine to go in and call here. Although this player's pre-flop raise to this point is pretty tight, so I wouldn't be getting very deep into like the mid-suited connectors, smaller suited aces, but I definitely would call every suited Broadway. Now, Queen 9 suited falls underneath the suited Broadways, obviously. It is a pretty good hand to 3-bet bluff. If you know your opponent folds decently, you got a queen blocker, your cards are suited, semi-connected, and most of the time when players are min opening the button, they're opening up 55 to 65% of hands, and so they typically should be folding enough here that you are going to make money with a hand like this, and that's typically what I'm looking for when it comes to my blind 3-bet bluff range. Is I'm looking for hands that aren't quite good enough to cold call. We're talking about both small blind and big blind, but especially in the small blind, and going with hands that are just below my acceptable cold call range and using them as 3-bet bluffs. But I'm personally not willing to do that until I see some information about their fold versus 3-bet. But especially with their pre-flop raise looking that tight, not going to mess around at all. I would lead out here. You've got a gutter. These players' ranges are wide. You can't check call here. I don't think you can check raise. And you guys know me. I'm a pretty big fan of donking. I've done some more work on that, and it is. I know a lot of players don't use the donk. It is a line that wins money. In fact, when I isolate my filtering, and this I'm talking about using my 2 million hand comparison database, and I look at results with donking in spots like this with like gutters, backdoor flush draws, stuff like that, donking always has better results than check calling or check raising. Now, of course, this is a fairly wide range of situations, wide range of opponents, so there's other factors that come in here. But the bottom line is the 5 or 6 times I've done a 2 million hand comparison database, that the win rate when bluff donking was always better than other win rates. You just can't ignore stuff like that. And especially when it comes to multi-way pots, I'm primarily looking to donk when I just don't have any other option. And that's really, well, actually, heads up, that's my system too. When check raise or check call doesn't look any good, then I'm going to donk out. And I also use my badge system to tell me when somebody is going to fold to a donk a higher than average, 45, 50% of the time. And I'll also donk out just because that badge is there, just because that tells me that's probably a little bit better option than other options. But this is the perfect example where I can't check call. I don't know about check raising, and so I'm just going to go with a donk as my doing something when I have a little something. Good. I like it. Yeah, now typically when something like that doesn't work, now I just check, and it's one of those things where if it didn't work on the flop, it's probably not going to work on the turn, and if you bet the turn, you're going to feel like you need to go ahead and try to rep the flush on the river, and I don't know. I'm just not that big of a fan of kind of making these blind 3-bet bluffs. Um, not 3-bet bluffs, but these kind of these blind multi-street bluffs. I think they'd be profitable long term, but it's one of those spots where I just think it's a bit too close. Even with when you have the gutter here. Now, if I had a little bit better, like let's say I had a gutter plus an ace high, a little bit more outs, then I'd be more inclined to do a turn barrel there. But really, mostly I think that a lot of times when you take this line, one of the benefits of it is you create a situation in which you get 2 cards for 1 price. And that's what I like about checking is this player will allow me to see a ton of rivers, and so my 1 bet, when I really couldn't have check called, I don't think, my 1 bet on the flop will oftentimes get me to see, on top of winning it on the flop, I'll get to see the turn and river for that price. Now this is interesting. Now he overbets on the river, trying to rep the flush. You know, there's nothing wrong with. You almost can't make a mistake bluffing on the river. Of course, you can make mistakes, but just as a general concept, most regs are folding the river. In my stakes, the average reg folds the river 57% of the time. That's all. That's versus all river bets. And so, based upon information like that, it's never that bad of an idea to bluff. Now, the question is the overpot of bluffing. I mean, that requires a fairly high frequency. And sometimes you're going to be bluffing into a flush, although I would have expected them to probably bet that on the turn. At least I would expect them to bet that on the turn at a fairly high frequency. And so now you're trying to get them off of a king or a 10. I typically want to know a little bit more about my opponent before I try that. I've been thinking more and more about bluffing versus recreational players. My brother's a pretty good mid-stakes player also, and he does bluff quite a bit using overbets versus recreational players, and he makes it work too, which made me start thinking that maybe I am being giving them too much or too little credit for being able to fold, and you may be able to push them off of one pair of hands. I just know most of my career I've overbet recreational players fully for value because I feel like I get a ton of calls, but a lot of that has to do with board texture where I think they have a hand that would be very difficult to fold, which is that would not be this situation at all. I would not be overbetting here for value because I think they have a lot of king X, 10X type hands. So maybe the opposite holds true, and an overbet here will work enough. $12.50, would $9 do the same as $12.50? I kind of think so. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad bluff. Anytime you put somebody in a really tough spot, that's usually a good thing. Yeah, king 10 in the cutoff suited. That's a standard open. Yeah, I would fold there too. The hand's just too weak, too many domination concerns. Even though the recreational player was giving you some pretty good odds. And it turned out had the best hand. Got a fold there. Table 2. Table 3, 9 jack suited should be an always open, even though the player to the left is a recreational player that calls quite a bit. 9 jack suited is still strong enough. And I mean, probably at this point in the games, this is obvious to everybody, but when we're playing hands against recreational players, we want hands that, on top of being able to flop decent 1-pair hands, that they're hands that can also, even if we miss, we're going to have one or two overs there fairly frequent. That's why I like to stay away from hands, say like you know, a 5-2 suited, or even a hand like Jack 5 suited. It's just because there's fewer straight, fewer backdoor straights, fewer overcards to the board that you can have, and when players are playing more hands, yeah, you want to play more hands, but not to a. You don't want to overdo it where your range is just much weaker than their range, and you're just not going to be able to overcome that. The difference in a range connectivity between your range and their range with your skill level. You can overcome some of it, depending on how good you are, but you don't want to be pushing that too far. We see bet here with lots of backdoors. We got one of our backdoors. I would definitely be firing here again. 10-8 off here on the button, even though these are recreational players, that is within my core opening range. Wouldn't be any weaker than that. No 10-7, no 9-7 off, but a 10-8 off is going to be an open for me. Table 3, we take it down. Ten jack off is an open for me in the cutoff. It's getting towards the bottom, but we got two recreational players left to act. I feel like hands like Jack 10 off, Queen 10 off, King 10 off are kind of like they're part of my always open in the cutoff range, but they're the very bottom of it. They're the hands I'm least comfortable with, especially if the button's going to give me a lot of trouble. But in terms of trouble, I really only worry about trouble from other regs, guys that are going to call me, 3-bet me a lot, and I don't have enough flop connectivity with those hands to have to really play against an aggressive player. Now, against a recreational player, for the reasons I just talked about here or just a minute ago, hands like that, even when they miss, they generally have a lot of ability to improve on the turn through backdoors and overcards and stuff like that. So I would have definitely been opening up that in this spot. Queen 8 off, table 2 as a potential squeeze, little too weak. Queen 8 suited on the button, I think that's an acceptable squeeze. Hang on here. I think that's a little bit of a tight fold. Table 4, we get a min open. We have 9-6 off. This is getting towards the bottom of my defense ranges versus a min open, but as a general rule, I'm not going to fold anything suited or anything offsuit and decent against a min open. And 6-9 off it's at the very bottom of offsuit and playable, offsuit and decent, but it is within there. And I've talked about my defense versus min open in other videos. I'm not going to go into that in any depth, but I've done a ton of analysis on the spot, and I feel very comfortable that even out of position, because of the odds we're getting, that we're fine there, especially against guys with 55, 60, 65% ranges. And but anyway, yeah, I want to go and keep replaying hands rather than go over things I've done in great detail previously, but I do feel very, very comfortable advising people to defend widely there, and that's all based upon pretty strong data. Yeah, I think sixes are a call here. I'm not too happy again about being out of position versus a recreational player. Plus, I expected the second player to come along, but recreational players, especially these players, are probably bad enough that even with short stacks, you can go ahead and call here profitably. I don't believe this at all. Now, the problem here, though, is this guy has shown himself to be pretty passive just from some of the hands I've noticed. This bet river of 25% has me worried, but I just have a lot of trouble believing this guy had a jack or queen, and he's now betting it. But on the other hand, he's not shown a lot of aggression, so that would make it a little bit close here. But yeah, I would call here. And also, if this guy had 2s through 5s, he'd also be betting them here. So we really just have to worry about 7s and 9s and 10s. I think we beat enough hands here that would bet plus a few bluffs that we can go ahead and call here. I'm not jumping up and down, but in excitement, but it's a call. Yeah, it's a little bit tight there, fourfold. I'll get aces table 4. Yeah, table 1, jack 6 offsuit. It's just too weak to isolate. Even jack 6 suited would be too weak. There's an interesting spot here. We've got the board just completely locked up here. Top set, not hardly any draws. But we can see here this guy has a pretty low fold versus flop C bet of only 33%. And sometimes I would consider slow playing this because we've got the board too locked up. But anytime somebody wants to be super defensive, you got to go for value. You got to go big for value here. So I would be going 70, 70, 70 here. Top right looks like we're in the big blind and it got limped around, and now we flopped out a 2 pair. This is also a spot here where I would just donk out. Gives a little bit of balance to our donking range, although I'm not overly concerned with that. I just want to make sure that against a recreational player that we don't depend on them to do betting. Recreational players, we need to depend on them to do calling. Now, alternatively, we could go for a check raise here. I'd like to know a little bit more information about their game. Of course, it's an anonymous table, and so I think with an anonymous table, either check raise or donking out would be fine. If I'm not knowing what they're going to be doing, I'd probably just rather go for a donk because a lot of recreational players don't have that high of a flop C bet. And my feeling is there's a lot more hands they'll call versus a donk than they would C bet themselves, and so you give yourself, you're just going to win more bets, more big blinds, leading out here for multiple streets than you would by a check raising, especially with his stack size. You're going to be able to get his stack by the river quite easily. I don't know, but, it wouldn't be easy because it's a limp pot, but you're going to get a lot closer here. Although that does make a case for raising too, because you would definitely get his stack in quite easily if you check raised. Yeah, I think either would be fine, but as a rule against a recreational player in limp pot, I'm going to lead for value. Yeah, we bet the turn. Yeah, good. He donks out. I like it. Yeah, you want to bet big, at least 70%. I think this is a mistake. Yeah, I just recreational players, they're just not floating here that often in order to bluff. That was kind of a brutal river. If you didn't see it, he rivered a set of eights. Yeah, recreational players, when you do a line like that, I think they're just going to check back with, say, like a draw or something like that, and just take the free equity. Yeah, if they've got a 7 or a 9, you're not worried about them catching two pairs. You give them a small bit of an equity to catch trips. I don't really worry about giving away equity on two outers, but yeah, I think it's just way too tricky to check in order to induce, unless you know something about that opponent that they're doing, that they're going to be betting there quite widely, and you can get your check raise in there. It's just better to go bet. Not much we can do with Queen 7 suited. Now he's looking at the opening range there, first open there, just see how wide this guy is opening up. Personally, I always look at their, and we don't have a sample size here, but if I'm looking to go after somebody lightly, which I forget what it was, Queen 8 suited, Queen 7 suited, I think that's an acceptable 3-bet bluff hand. I mean, it's getting down to the very bottom of what I would do against EPMP or cutoff, but I'm less concerned with how much they open and much more concerned with how much they fold versus 3-bets. Now, clearly there should be a there should be a connection between the two, but and I'm sure there is to some decent degree, but there's not a strong enough correlation between opening frequencies and fold versus 3-bet frequencies that we should be looking at opening frequencies to determine if we can go for a 3-bet bluff with with super weak hands. Fold versus 3-bet is much more correlated just to how sticky your opponent is, and I've seen players that open up 40% of buttons and they're still folding 75% against 3-bets, and that's just because they don't like playing against 3-bets very much. And I've seen players that open up 60 or 65% of buttons that are only folding 50% of the time. And so I just think it's important to look at that. Now, in a situation like this where we only have 173 hands, we're never going to have fold versus 3-bet stats that we can use, but I'm still, and so the first open is the only stat that you could use to determine maybe if it's possible. But honestly, I just don't like to put myself into situations of unknown profitability based upon a minimal amount of information like that. We've got some interesting hands going on here. We've got ace-3 suited with a limp and over limp. Like I've said before, my preference here, especially with the suited ace, would be to raise this up, although I do think a complete is okay. They'll both make money, although my analysis makes me think that isolating here makes a little bit more money. I would very much 3-bet with this hand. Yeah, we really have nothing with this board texture, and just have to check and give up unless we somehow get to the turn and catch a harder ace. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. That was way too tight of a fold. Back up. Yeah, ace-5 off on the button. This is any ace isn't always open. There's not a situation in which you would not open up an ace on the button. Absolutely no question about that. Yeah, I'm a little surprised to see that. I don't know if there was a misclick. I wanted to go back and see if I missed something or other there. But yeah, this should be an always open here. Yeah, we 3-bet the jacks. Yeah, 8-5 suited, and the cutoff is a hand I would consider opening up if the button was on the tight side. But that's getting to the very, very bottom of my very wide cutoff opens when I go wide. And we just don't have any information about the button, so like I said before with like the 3-bet bluff, I'm not going to put myself into spots of questionable profitability if without any information. I think Queen-8 off on the button is an absolute open, especially with a weak player out there in the big blind. Like I said previously, I don't like getting in there too weak, but a Queen-8 strong enough. You know, Queen-7, Queen-6, Queen-5. Yeah, now we're starting to get a little bit more borderline. But and just watching this guy over this very short video play just makes me think this guy's very, very weak, and that means I can play a few more marginal hands. Although once again, I want hands that are going to give me the best possible flop connectivity. But Queen-8 would definitely be in there. I think it's Queen-8, Queen-8, Queen-7. And also the small blind doesn't 3-bet hardly at all, 4% over a moderate sample size, and so we can kind of make that much less of a factor here, and so we're going to see tons of flops. And another interesting thing I've learned through my analysis is how valuable it is when players let you see the flop versus making you face a 3-bet. Even with the very bottom of your ranges, they roughly give you about maybe 1.5 big blinds per hand, calling versus 3-bets, and I do that by, I mean, a hand like that can never defend against a 3-bet, and so I take the loss rate to figure that out. I took the loss rate when you fold versus a 3-bet, which is your average open, and I looked at loss rates when you flop air. And typically, even when you flop air out of position, even when you check that air, you're still going to be making between half and 3/4 of a big blind more than had you just folded. And that just comes from, you know, all the times that you get to see a free turn, a free river, you improve by showdown. Maybe you check down a king or queen high, that's the best hand, yeah, there's a lot of profitability when guys will not 3-bet you and put you in that situation and just allow you to flop. And then on top of that, that's with air. So on top of that, you also have all the times that you, um, um, sorry, and then you have all the times that you get to connect with the board, and you're obviously going to make much more money connecting with the board than you would had you just been forced to fold versus a 3-bet. I think I said earlier that this player was playing on iPoker, and that's Everest Poker's not iPoker. Hang on, I got to stop and figure this out. Just a sec. Yeah, I looked it up on the internet. It looks like they joined the network 2 years ago or something. Now I was just assuming they were iPoker because when I loaded his hands into a Hold'em Manager, it said it was iPoker and iPoker skin. But then I was sitting there thinking, I thought Everest Poker was their own poker site. It doesn't really matter. If I was saying that wrong, I wanted to correct that mistake. But anyway, let's keep on going with the play. Yeah, I'd have to fold 3s in this spot here. Yeah, yeah, 3 is, the problem with 3s in that spot is that's a biggish squeeze. And so, it cuts down your implied odds, but on the other hand, you've got to think that maybe this pot goes 4-way, because clearly you're set mining here. About the only way you're going to win this pot is to hit a set. And since, if you factor in that most likely it's going to go 3 or 4-way, that makes it a little bit better, but you're in the worst possible position. You're going to be last to act, and with the oversize a bet there, yeah, I stick by a fold, but a call's not bad. It's just a question of how often you get paid when you get a set. I would like it if one of the two half stackers were not half stackers but full stacked. But the fact that they're half stacked does mean they're going to come along a lot more often. That's giving you much better implied odds. I think it's fine either way. Yeah, I like 4xing the isolation here. Not afraid of the flush, keep betting. Table 1, 5-6 off, just too weak to isolate. Better just to call. So we need to back up here a little bit. I don't know if you end up isolating there with King 5 suited. Yeah, he did. King 5 suited in the cutoff. It's okay. That's starting to get a little bit light. Button, I'd be a little bit more okay with that. A little bit surprised to see that after missing some, in my opinion, some ace-X isolations. Obviously, you've got to c-bet this, even though it's four-way. Okay, now table 1, queen 2 off is just too weak of an open, in my opinion. If I were suited, I would definitely open it. Oh, no. You got to bet here. Table 3. Let's back up here just a hair. Yeah, table 2, it looks like you missed the flop C bets. Yeah, you're not going to necessarily get that many folds, but I think you get enough folds along with your equity that you're fine here. And you got to think about, all the better hands you're going to fold out, all the equity you're going to steal away here. Assuming, let's just assume these guys didn't hit here. You've got ace highs you can fold out, and then every other 2-card combo, they're going to have as many as 18 outs, although there's going to be some crossover cards here, or cards that cross over with yours. But still, there's a ton of equity to steal away here. You could throw $5 or €5 at the €8. And then, of course, if you do catch, you're going to make good money there building the pot. But yeah, here, table 3, we call the open, gets checked around. Now, a little bit of a concern here is this player has a very low opening frequency, small sample size, so we don't want to read too much into that. They haven't been c-betting, so it does increase the probability that they have some sort of better pair hand that's going to be check calling. But still, there's a ton of cards we need to steal equity away from, including one spade hands. I think you definitely need to be betting here. And then we get an awful card like the king. Yeah, I really think you need to bet here. If everybody checked the king, we need to bet here. It doesn't even need to be a big bet, just half pot, get us to showdown, charge some single spades, take away some equity, all that good stuff. But the bet should have been on the flop. Now that I get the river, I don't see any point in betting now on the river. Now it's just a check. Yeah, you're third best, you save yourself some money, but still, I think against their entire range, you'd have been better off betting. So yeah, here I'll go back just so you can see what I saw on table 1. Okay, so he is. Pass a little bit. So he is looking at first open frequencies in order to determine if he should 3-bet bluff or not. And like I said, I'm much more interested in fold versus 3-bet. I won't go over that again. I already completely explained myself with that. But yeah, now maybe what he's doing here a little bit is he's just looking at the general fold versus 3-bet, sees it's very high, and just wants to double check and make sure this guy is opening in early and middle. And maybe I can't quite see the sample size here. Maybe the sample size is just too small. Yeah, 525 hands. That would be a legitimate use of individual opening frequencies as long as he was looking at this fold versus 3-bet general frequency. And this would definitely want me to take hands that were not quite strong enough to call with, which King Jack off clearly is, and go with a 3-bet bluff. And I don't typically do a lot of 3-bet bluffing in this particular spot, but the information we have here makes it decent. Now we're worried that another reg called here. Now generally if a player is going to call a 3-bet here, it means that he most likely has a hand that's a good made hand that's not quite strong enough to get all in pre-flop. Tens, maybe jacks, ace queen, maybe nines, stuff like that. Maybe king queen if he's a little bit more suspicious. But this player has a fairly high fold versus 3-bet, and so I don't think he's getting out of line at all. So we're either talking about a borderline hand like tens or jacks that he doesn't want to quite get in against what could potentially be nutted type hands, but he can't quite fold, or maybe it's a trap. Now, basically, sometimes a player will feel like if he 3-bets here, he just looks way too strong. Like, let's say he's got aces. He just looks way too strong 3-betting here. It's like aces or kings or nothing. And this guy is a pretty tight 3-better, so he might be thinking stuff like that. Anyway, as it turned out, we had an ace on the flop. The original opener let out. With that player left to act, yeah, I think it's just better to fold there because I just don't think the original opener is going to be doing a donk bluff 3-way with any type of frequency. I'm not quite sure why he would lead out with a made hand, but I also don't feel like players were bluffing in that spot, and so the weak second pair hand just wasn't strong enough. Yeah, I think versus a limp, I would be isolating with ace-5 off in position there. We'll finish these two hands, and that'll be it on this video. Yeah, c-bet with the gutter. I think that's good. Yeah, I think the call there was fine. Call again. Not super happy, but they'll be messing around enough that it's okay. All right, good place to end this video. All right, good place to end this video, and we will start video 3 where we're paused at now.